Today's guest is Bob Martin. Bob used to be a criminal trial lawyer. He is now a meditation teacher at Elon University. He's written a book, he coaches on meditation, and I love this conversation because I think it will change your mind of what meditation is. It isn't just sitting quietly thinking about nothing. It's really realizing, what am I thinking and how is that impacting me? Because once we realize what we're thinking, we can decide the outcome on that thought. I can't wait for you to hear today's conversation. Who's the person you're being? Are you satisfied? Welcome to Be the Person, a podcast for the brave and the curious, for people ready to explore their true potential. I'm your host, Annie Randall. Join me and let's get ready to go on this journey together. Welcome to Be the Person podcast. I'm so excited to introduce today's guest, Bob Martin. Bob used to be a criminal trial lawyer. He now teaches meditation at Elon University, and he has so many great resources. I'm excited for our conversation today. Welcome, Bob.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the welcome and thank you for the platform. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about you, because that's an interesting journey from where you started to where you ended now.
Yeah. Um, I started actually in amusement parks and carnivals. My folks were the cotton candy popcorn people in the carnivals. We sold hot dogs on the boardwalk in Queens, New York. That's where I started. Long story short, got a little bit older. I wound up going to law school, became a lawyer. And just to give you a time reference, we're talking about the early 70s, the cocaine cowboy days, the days of the movie Scarface and Miami Vice. And, it's funny that those things actually capture the vibe of what Miami was like in those days. And I was right in the middle of all that. And when we were in the DA's office, we wound up hitting the mob for a lot of money. And after I left that office, they came to me and they said they'd like to hire me. And so I wound up working with the Colombians and the Italians and the Cubans, the Haitians. And it was a crazy time in Miami. And it was a crazy time for me too. Professionally, I was doing great. Personally, man, my life was kind of falling apart.
And so what happened between, is that at the point you started to get into a meditation practice?
I would say that it was a longer process than just that, but that was the time when I was seeing a therapist, and I found out that my therapist was a student and actually the English language editor for a 72nd generation. Think about that for a second. 1,400 years of passing wisdom down from father to son. 72nd generation Taoist master priest from the Shaolin Temple. That's the Kung Fu Tai Chi temple in China. And so I got to meet this man, Master Watching Ni, and study under him. And eventually that led me to a very different life.
Yeah. How long was that process, and what were the steps that you started to take to enter that journey?
Well, my folks came out of Eastern Europe, and I can't say that I really have any ancestors because my dad was Hungarian royalty and the Bolsheviks wiped out all of his family. And my mom was Roma Gypsy and everybody wiped out those folks. So we didn't really grow up in a religious family. Wasn't part of a conversation. And when I met Master Ni, I was introduced to Taoism, which it didn't ask me to believe in God or to believe in any kind of creatures or supernatural creatures. It just gave me a operating manual of how to live life. And so I studied under Master Ni for 6 years, and it was a gradual process. Taoism doesn't have a lot to do with meditation, but Buddhism does. And when I got to North Carolina, I actually ran into some trouble with my mob clients and thought that it was best that I leave Miami. So I moved to North Carolina. And when I got here, there was not a lot of Taoists, but there are a lot of Buddhists. And I started following some Buddhist teachings, and that led me into meditation. And then fortunately, a group, um, I, I guess they saw something in me and they asked me if I would engage in the training to become a meditation teacher, which was pretty intense, 2-year training.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
So what does your personal meditation practice, what does it look like today?
Today, well, I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I have usually 15 students at a time. And every day, based on the way that I teach meditation, every single day, I get a log from them, just a short log about what their meditation was like the day before. And I sit down and I answer their log and I give them a little coaching. And so every single day we communicate. And that's a really precious time of the morning for me. And I take my dogs out. You asked me, this is part of my routine. I take
Yeah.
my dogs out to the elementary school nearby and at the break of dawn. And I sit there and I reflect on the day that's coming. I always remind myself that I'm trading a day of my life for the day that's coming, and that there are a lot less days in front of me than there are behind me at 75, and that I want to leave something in the day that's good. And then I go home and I sit usually 15 to 20 to 30 minutes and I do what's called a breath awareness meditation. And like so many other folks, my mind goes nuts still after 20 years. Everybody says, oh, I could never meditate because my mind goes nuts. And they think that's not something that's supposed to happen, but that's what happens when you meditate. And so my mind goes nuts and I kind of watch it and look for what's coming up. And then I turn around and I yeah, deal with my emails and generally write some poetry. And by then my wife gets up and the day begins.
You describe it. I've heard you describe it of like you think meditation would be really quieting your mind. But what you just said, that doesn't happen. So,
No, not at all.
yeah. What is the point or what are you trying to do then during that time of meditation?
Well, the meditation that people talk about quieting the mind, what they really are saying is relaxation. They really say, I want to relax. I want to just take a breath and, just relax and not have all this stress and, take a couple of minutes for myself. That's what they mean. Meditation is a little different. Meditation is a process where we actually, I guess the best way to say it is we step out of being our thoughts and into being the creator of our thoughts. And I know that might sound a little weird, but if you think about the language that we use, we often say, "Oh, hey, I had a thought," or "I had this great idea." And even in saying that, we kind of recognize that we're not the thought. It's something that we have. You have a thought. So then I would ask, who is the I that is having the thought? And what happens in life with all of the conditioning and all of the brouhaha and stuff that we have in life, we kind of get disconnected from the I that's having the thoughts, the creator of the thoughts. We're kind of run by our auto drive. Whatever happens, a thought comes up from our database, and then that's our truth. You see somebody and you're not happy about the fact that their underwear is showing from their pants, and their pants are halfway down their butt. And immediately you have all these judgments about who that person is and what they're like, and whether you like it or whether you don't like it, and all this other stuff. And when those thoughts come up and you act on those thoughts and they're automatic and you're just on auto drive, that is what we call being your thoughts. But many times, and I think, you've experienced this as well, you might be talking to somebody, and even as you're talking to that person, there's like another voice in your head that's saying, oh, this isn't going very well. Or, oh, I said that pretty well. or something like that, and you have this like little commentary. Well, when that little commentary is happening automatically, it's not very skillful. But when you can go to that place where the commentary comes from and you start reconnecting with the commentator, then in that place where you're watching your thoughts and being the creator of your thoughts, it is a much more stable, a much more, a less emotional, a less roller coastery place in life. And so meditation doesn't take you away from the roller coaster, but it does give you the skill in being able to watch yourself on the roller coaster.
I love that analogy. Would you say it's more than of like, I think a lot of times we're just listening to those thoughts
Mhm.
instead of really creating those thoughts ourselves?
Yeah. And I would go even another step and I say, we're not even really listening to them. They're just happening and we're acting on them. And there's not a lot of listening involved.
Yeah.
You just have the thought and you are it. I used to play a game with my kid to teach him this. And I would say, let's always play a game where we suspect our initial thought. And so we'll go out to Applebee's to have dinner, and the waitress comes over and she's going, "Oh, I'm going to take care of you tonight. And, I'm going to be your waitress." And, that she's all being bubbly and the like. And my son says, "Oh, look, she's bucking for a tip." See, now that's the thought that came up automatically. And without looking at that thought and seeing whether that thought is helpful or not, we would just go with it. It would happen, and then that would be our truth. And we would believe that she's bucking for a tip, and we would treat her like she's bucking for a tip. And she would probably treat us like we feel she's bucking for a tip. And we might not leave her a nice tip, and the whole thing might not go very well. So then I would say to him, "Well, game on." And I'm sorry to say this, I don't mean to be rude, but my next question to him, he was already 17, so it was okay. I said to him, "Well, maybe she got some last night and that's why she's happy." And he goes, "Okay, yeah, and well, maybe she's a college student and her parents decided to give her a car. Like maybe it would be nice if you gave me a car." And so we went back and gave all of these hypotheses about why it might be that she was so happy. And eventually I said, "No, I know why she's so happy. She's so happy because she thinks I'm incredibly handsome." And he said, "Yeah, well," and I said, "No, game over. I'm going to go with that one." So I kind of created my own reality there. Now, you might say I was faking it and I was just making it up, but you're making up that she's bucking for a tip. You're making that up too. So who knows what's really real? So I told him I was going to go with, she thinks I'm incredibly handsome. And we flirted a little bit during the evening and we left her a nice tip. And I walked out happy and she was happy. And we had a wonderful dinner. So that kind of looking at your mind and looking at your thoughts and thinking about your thoughts is what meditation is really all about. And over time, you start to realize that you have a lot of thoughts that aren't helpful. And after you watch them for a while, you kind of get bored of them. I mean, how many times can you say, "I don't like that person whose underwear is showing," before you're bored of saying it? And when you finally get bored of saying it, it just goes away. You don't think it anymore. You
Yeah.
can't make yourself not think it, but you can certainly allow yourself to think it until it kind of becomes an old story and goes away on its own.
When you're saying that, it comes up of like, I think we all tell ourselves at some point these stories having to do with, what's happened to us, kind of like you told the story of, I think she's bucking for a tip. Do you think that we always tell ourselves these stories and it's just recognizing in that moment, like the story I'm telling myself is?
A story.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, yes. You hit that absolutely on the head. We're doing it all the time. The only difference between meditation and not meditation is that we're recognizing that we're doing it when we meditate, and we're not just doing it. And what that does for us when we recognize it and watch it happening, it gives us the freedom of having access to it and deciding whether it's helpful or not helpful. And it gives us access to our database and gives us the ability to reprogram our database so that the next time, this is a weird example, but the next time I go to Applebee's and somebody comes over real bubbly, maybe the thought comes up, she just thinks I'm handsome.
Yeah.
And instead of she's bucking for a tip. And so you kind of, it's a skill. What meditation is, it is a skillful, practical practice of learning to become skillful with managing your thinking.
I love that. In a totally different way than I think most people think about meditation.
Yes, I may be at work and there's a person that upset me. And so I reacted in an upset way. And later on, I'm thinking about it and I'm saying there might have been a better way or more helpful way for me to respond to that. And so just by recognizing that and allowing it, maybe the next time that it happens, I might still respond in an angry way, but maybe not the next time or the next time or the next time. I think the important part is this: you can't make yourself stop thinking anything, but you can become aware and watch your thinking. And then somehow, and this is the magic of it, somehow on its own, it starts to sort itself out. And you find that your thinking on its own is becoming the thinking that you would rather have than the automatic thinking that came up. Because you do got to remember that mostly our thoughts are not ours. Mostly our thoughts are the conditioning. They're our parents' thoughts. They're all the do's and don'ts that were dumped on us as a child. They're all the do's and don'ts we learned as we were teenagers growing up from society. All that conditioning is the stuff that comes up. And we have to let it come up and watch it and be in a place where the observer of it can look at it and go, you know, I don't really believe that. I think that, and I don't really believe that. And over time, with that allowance and with that gentleness that you give yourself, that grant of gentleness, you find that you start to become the person that you choose to be.
Gosh, I'm just thinking of this. I mentioned to you, meditation was newer to me, probably in the last 8 months, but a practice I have now. And, fear was one of the things that kept coming up for me, like of just, I don't even know, it could be fear of several different things, but just recognizing that over time, instead of living in this, because I think a lot of people live in fear, recognizing, hey, what are those triggers? And are they real triggers? And do I really need to be afraid? Has been so helpful for me.
You hit it so on the head. That's so true. I just had a student who, if they take my course on college, I mean, I teach privately, but I also teach on campus. And if they take the course, it's an elective. So they have to be choosing to take the course. And she chose to take the course. And the way that I teach it, as I mentioned, they practice every day and they log in and I get the logs. And I'm noticing I'm not getting logs from her. So I sat down with her and I asked her, I'm curious, what's going on here? I mean, here you decided that there would be a benefit from it. And I'm sure that you realize you can't go to the gym and just look at the machines. You have to get on them and work them. So what's going on? And she said, oh, I don't know. It's funny. I always seem to know what I need to do, but I never really do it. And so we continued the conversation, and I'm asking her meditation type questions like, well, what are you thinking? What are the exact words that you're using? And where do you feel it in your body? And those were real weird questions to start out. Where do you feel it in your body? I feel it all over, of course. I feel it in my eyes. I feel, and then the dam broke, and she started crying. And in her weeping, she said, I just don't feel that I deserve to be happy.
Wow.
And so, because I am trained, yeah, I didn't get thrown for a loop and say, oh my God. But it was the next thing was, well, where do you feel that in your body? And here she's crying, right? And
Yeah.
I'm saying, like, normally, just so where do you feel that in your body? Well, I feel it in my eyes. Of course, you fool. Of course, where do you think I feel it? I feel it in my eyes. He said, no, I mean, really, where else do you feel it? And I kept asking and kept asking. And finally, she started trying to answer the question. And finally, she identified a spot about 2 inches under her left collarbone. She said, I feel it there. It feels hot and it feels like it should be throbbing, but it's not throbbing. It's not my heart, but that's where I feel it. And I said, you notice you stopped crying. And she goes, oh, yeah. And I said, well, look at this. Most of your crying, you're thinking about all the times that you sabotaged yourself in the past. And you're thinking about catastrophizing the future and all of the things you're going to ruin about your life in the future. And that causes you to get real emotional. But right now, you're thinking about a physical sensation in your body. And you're realizing that right now, right here, there is nothing that is happening that would cause you to cry. And she goes, oh, that's what you've been meaning about being in the present moment. I thought it was something mystical. I thought it was something magical. It's just about noticing what's going on in your body. I go, yeah, that's it. And she goes, oh, that's really cool. And she wrote me a reflection at the end of the course that was 5 pages long. Most of my students, it's half a page, 5 pages. And she goes, my life will never be the same. Because now, she got that she was catastrophizing about the future, but the future hadn't gotten here. And she was talking about the past, and that's like old history. And she all of a sudden had the freedom, to look at her thinking and decide that it wasn't helpful and that she could create different thoughts. And she had the power to do that. So it was really cool. And that's what you talk about fear. What is the fear of? The fear of is generally, if you could rephrase it, it would be, I'm scared that I'm always going to keep doing all the stuff I've been doing.
Yeah.
Right? That's generally the fear. And when you realize that, well, but right now, I've got a plate of food in front of me. The only thing that I got to do right now is eat that plate. It's all I got to do. I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to fix the future and fix the past. I just got to eat this plate. And, when you can start to focus on what's the next thing I got to do, a lot of the fear just goes away on its own.
Yeah. I think it's so powerful because in the moment, like how you're explaining it, it seems super simple, but yet life gets in the way and we're bombarded with so much. And if we don't take that minute or 15 minutes just to be like, wait a minute, what am I thinking? And then identify those things, they just can take over our life.
That you perfectly said. Perfectly. Absolutely. That's it. It's just taking those few minutes.
Do you feel like you need an adventure or a new challenge in 2025? Join Jeff and I on our Peru trip. We're going to do a one-day hike to Machu Picchu. That's always been on my bucket list, but it's becoming more and more restricted. So right now you can still walk around Machu Picchu, but I believe that won't be the case for long. We're also going to explore the Amazon jungle, the city of Lima, have the option to hike Rainbow Mountain. It's going to be a wonderful trip. It happens next September. See all the full details in the show notes. So, what would you say to the person? Because I'm guessing you hear this a lot of, I don't have time to meditate.
Yeah. So there's an old Zen saying. It says that you should meditate 15 minutes a day unless you don't have time. In that case, you should meditate for an hour a day
Yeah.
because because you just don't get it that you do have the time. It's not about time, it's about priority.
Yeah.
Because if your uncle died in California, all of a sudden you would have the time and the money to go attend to it.
Yeah.
It's about priority. So to say that you don't have 10 or 15 minutes simply means I am not willing to give this practice the priority of scrolling through Facebook. That really is what it comes down to. So I would say to that, here's something that you don't have to have any special equipment for. It doesn't cost anything. You can do it in your own house. It doesn't take more than 10 minutes, and it doesn't require a lot of physical activity, and it can increase your life expectancy. It can reduce your immunological threat. It can bring about a sense of causation. It can give you the opportunity to become and have the life you want to live. I don't know. So to weigh,
Right.
why would I not have 10 minutes?
Right. I think that's such a good point. Like, we have time, what we
Yeah,
make time for.
we have time. Exactly. Exactly.
Can you tell me more about, maybe you've already talked about the mind body connection and the overall health perspectives, but what about like from a weight loss or a healing perspective? Can you go there?
I lost 112 pounds.
Oh,
When you start to recognize that you have thoughts, that you are not your thoughts, but that you have thoughts, you begin to recognize that, oh, I'm hungry, or I want to eat something, or I'm bored. I'm going to walk over to the refrigerator. I want to open it up and look and know what is there to eat, what is there to eat, which is generally what we do. That these are all thoughts that I'm having. They're just thoughts. They are actually not in control of our body unless we yield that control to them. Thoughts do not last for more than 12 to 18 seconds. They don't.
yeah.
So you might have that thought, and somebody just wrote a great book, and I love the book. She called it the 5 second practice. It says count backwards from 5. So you have the thought like I'm hungry. It's not so much I'm hungry. It's I'm bored, or I got nothing to do, or I wonder what there is to eat, or something like that. And she goes. She said, "Go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1," and you'll notice that the thought is gone.
Yeah.
So it's a skill. I mean, I'm saying that you don't wave a wand and all of a sudden you can do this. You have to practice and fail and practice and fail, and that's okay. But at some point, it starts to take hold. And when it starts to take hold, it's almost as if you start giggling at yourself. It's like you have the thought, oh, I'm sitting here watching the news. My wife is gone. So the little boy in me says, I can get away with eating. I can get away with this. And I want to go over and eat something. And I just go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I go back to watching the news. So it's a skill. There's a lot of neurochemistry that's involved about the stimulation of dopamine, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the brain. But the brain is a funny thing. It's something called neuroplasticity, and you can actually change the structure of your brain with your thinking. There was a great experiment done in England where the taxi cab drivers have to pass a test. They have to know every little alleyway in London. They have to study the map, and then they have to take this very intense test. So they took a picture of their brains, especially the hippocampus. And the hippocampus houses the directional sense in your brain. That's where your sense of direction is. So they took a picture of the hippocampus, and then the subject went on and did their studying. And then they took another picture, and they found out that this organ of the brain had grown longer, wider, taller, and thicker. So, using their thinking, they changed the physical structure of their brain. So that's why, same thing, you go and you do biceps and you find that, you start to build up a little muscle. It works exactly the same in the brain. Do we have a moment? I'd like to talk a little bit about that neuroplasticity thing.
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So they know this. They know, and like the ancients knew it 4,000 years ago, and the brain scientists are just discovering it. That the right side of the prefrontal cortex, that houses your fight flight response, sympathetic nervous system. And they find that if the electrical activity on the right side of your brain is way, way more intense, there's more of it than on the left side of your brain, they can predict with incredible accuracy that you're going to be cynical, negative view of things. You're going to think the worst parts of you are the real parts and that the good parts are the things like that. They find that if the left side of the brain is more active than the first side, you're probably going to be an optimist. You're going to believe that, it's about faith and connectivity and rest and digest and all of that's housed in that part of your brain. Well, the world throws so much stuff at us. And the right side of the brain is more sensitive anyway because it houses our survival instinct. And your survival instinct is going to be way more powerful than your beauty instinct. Because beauty is nice, but you got to survive in order to experience it.
Yeah.
And so we are evolved to have a more sensitive right side, and the world throws us all of the news and all of the deadlines and all of the, I got to get my kids to school and I don't have the right thing to wear, and it throws all this stuff at us. So it's constantly being activated. And as it's activated, it's growing more neural pathways. And a good, well developed neural pathway, what it feels like emotionally is, oh, like a good, thick mathematic neural pathway feels like, oh, I can do math. I'm good at math. Yeah, give me an example. I can do that. That's what it feels like. An undeveloped neural pathway feels like, I don't like to do that, or that's hard for me to think about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we just allow the world to do what it does, we're going to wind up going down a rabbit hole. That neural side is going to build up, and at the extreme, we start thinking about conspiracies and plots and all kinds of terrible stuff. Even normally, we're worried about deadlines and have a chronic sense of stress. The left side, we actually, the world doesn't just drop that on us. So we kind of have a responsibility to curate our environment with beautiful things that bring you joy and happiness. If there's a picture that reminds you of a wonderful time when you were in a rowboat with your beloved or something, well, put that picture on your desk and be reminded of it. Let that stimulate the and build up. We have to intentionally build up that electrical activity on the left side of our brain by seeing the sun come up, experiencing awe, allowing ourselves to cry at ASPCA advertisement with those, don't look away at those poor dogs, but feel their pain and allow yourself to want to reach out and ease the suffering. These are all things which activate that part of the brain. And when we become balanced, we feel that life is better. We're happier. And so a lot of people ask me, what's the first thing to do? And the first thing to do is put pretty pictures around you. Paint the wall a color that makes you feel happy. Do stuff like that. It's important.
And you know what? I'm thinking about, like, as adults, how many times, like, we don't do that. You're right. Like, the world feeds us all of those things for the right side, but we never take time to have pretty pictures or look at just things that bring you joy. I think a lot of times, I know this was true for me of being a business owner and a mom, like, there were several years in where I had to be like, wait a minute, what does bring me joy? And think about that because it wasn't happening naturally.
Right. Right. We have to, that's the only way I can think of saying it. We have a responsibility to joy.
Yeah.
We have to do it. It'll have to be intentional because the world ain't going to give it to you.
Yeah. What would you say then is the second step? If that's the first step of recognizing, yes, I'm going to build this left side, I'm going to build the joy, and then I want to start meditating, I want to start getting into this, what would be the next thing you would suggest?
Well, I mean, there are books, there are apps, but, I would have to tell you that there's nothing like a coach.
Mm,
There is nothing like a coach. So that's not, and many times that's not something that people can commit to either because of finances or because of time commitments. It means that you have to say that I'm going to go someplace 1 hour a week or pay a fee. But if anybody's had an experience with yoga, that you can watch a yoga video and you can learn a lot from it. I'm not saying you won't, but there's nothing like the coach that's going to say, raise your elbow a couple of inches,
yeah,
because they know that picking your elbow up that extra little bit is going to activate a different muscle that's necessary for you to gain the balance that's necessary. They just know. They
yeah,
just know the difference that little adjustments make. And it's like if you watch people in tree stand, you got the 1 foot on the ground and you're standing there so solidly and they look so, perfect. But if you look at their foot, the foot is going out of balance and rebalancing and readjusting and it's adjusting and readjusting. It's making all these little adjustments,
yeah,
and or when you're driving, you don't just hold the steering wheel in a steady place. You're always making these little adjustments and little corrections so that it doesn't have to become a big correction. And so what we want to do is we want to get to a place in our lives, I think, where we are aware enough of what's going on within us, within others, and within the environment around us that we are regularly and naturally making those little adjustments that's necessary to keep the boat floating downstream easily. And a coach can help you with that. So it's great to get a coach. If you can't do that, I don't want to be too self promoting here, but I will say, and a lot of people ask me that same question, and I've answered it a million times. And so I decided I would just write all the answers down and make a little booklet out of it. And so I offered that booklet free of charge on my website. You can download it, and it's got how do I get started? And if there are books I want to read, I refer some books and some apps and some resources and explain why a coach is helpful and different methodologies and what's necessary. And I also put in some cartoons and some other stuff. So it's freely downloadable. And I would say the next best step is download my little free ebook, and read through it. And from that, you will get at least one or two options of where to go next.
yeah, so good. I'll make sure I link to that in the show notes. Thank you for giving that to the audience. I think that will be really helpful. So tell me, out of all of the practices that you do, What would you recommend and what do you find most effective?
So what I found is finding a time that you can gift yourself every day. And I don't care if I'm on vacation, I don't care if I'm traveling. What I found personally is that I own the morning, but the day owns me. Once the day starts, I just, it owns me. I got to do whatever is called. I got to go wherever I'm called to go, answer whatever I'm asked, you know, get the emails and the telephone calls and all the honeydews from my wife and the like. And so the day owns me, but I own the morning. And so I get up a little bit earlier and I use that time. And as I mentioned, I take my dogs to the little elementary school when the sun comes up. Sometimes it's real cold. Sometimes I don't want to go, but sometimes I grumble and mumble and but I still put the coat on and put my shoes on and come on, let's go, guys. And we go down to the little park and I sit there. And I have a little routine that I go through that day, a little mantra that's developed over time. I started with, "This is the day the Lord has made, be happy and rejoice in it." Years ago. That was my wife really liked that, and she told me about it, and I liked it, and that's a good place. So that was, "This is the day the Lord has made." So that's what I would say. And over time, I added a little to it, and I took away, and I read something that I really liked, and I added to it. So over the years, I kind of crafted my own morning affirmation. So I do it in the park. You don't have to do it in the park. You can have it when you have your morning coffee, sit in a chair. The point is, take a few minutes where you say to yourself, "I am giving myself this time," because like you say, you have a job, you're a mom, right? And there's the old expression that comes from the North Carolina hills. Hey, when mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And so you got a responsibility to keep yourself straight. You got a responsibility because when mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So you take a few minutes and get yourself happy. And you're doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for those that you love around you. And hopefully you find benefit in the small things. There's that book, "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff," and it's all small stuff. Getting a little perspective on life by taking a few minutes. If you take a couple of minutes in the morning and put out a bird feeder and watch the bird come feed on the bird feeder. And I mean, it's amazing. It could be just a bird landing on the bird feeder, but it also could be the fact that you put out the bird feeder and you provided this little creature with this little seed that's going to give them nourishment. I mean, you can put so much into it, so much caring and love into it, that it opens your heart. And when your heart starts to open, it gets hungry for that stuff. You start to get hungry for the love and the kindness and the affection and the grace that's available in life.
So good. Bob, I think so many people are going to learn a lot from you. Think about this totally different. What would be the best way for them to connect with you?
On my website, I've made it easy. You'll find everything on awiseandhappylife.com. And there's even a contact button if you want to send me an email. I promise I'll respond to it. If you want to get in touch with me, have a question that comes out of this, I'm happy to take an email. So it's awiseandhappylife.com.
Awesome. I will make sure I link to that in our show notes so people can easily find you. And I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and being on today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And I have to say, we should not forget all of your audience. I want to remind them, when you create a podcast like this, it's not a little thing, it's a lot of work. it's a lot of work. It is, getting the technology right, and then finding the guests, and then arranging for them, and scheduling it, and having them, and preparing for it. And what do you do it for? You do it for guys like me who can come on and maybe share a little bit of something that's helpful. It's a real act of love. So, kudos to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I know our audience learned from you. If there was something specific that you would like to share, please share it with somebody. It helps the podcast grow. It helps spread the word, especially because I think we're all going to think of meditation differently after this. And as always, it would mean the world if you gave us a 5-star review.